Hello and welcome to the Frans van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. A major error is how NATO's top military chief commander has described the burning of several copies of the Quran in Afghanistan by American military personnel in the last week. But that mistake has been deadly indeed. What it has done is resulted in violent protests across the country, not to mention the shootings of 2 US soldiers. But how could such a mistake occur given it's been nearly 10 years since the Americans entered Afghanistan? A journalist and a writer who intimately knows the country is Edward Girardet. His book, Killing the Cranes, A Reporter's Journey Through 3 Decades of War, was published last year, and he joins me in the studio today. Edward Girardet, thank you so much for being with us. This Quran burning incident seems to be lacking extraordinarily in sensitivity. One would have thought that after 10 years in the country, NATO would have known better.
That's the issue. The problem is that for the past 10 years, Afghanistan, from the Western point of view, has been run by generals. And, you know, a lot of the officers are very well read. I've met quite a few of them. The problem is that most of the ordinary soldiers, the ones working on the ground, they really don't have much sensitivity. They don't understand Afghanistan. Most go in there for 6 months, and it usually takes about 6 months to even begin to understand what's going on. So, you know, I mean, it's very surprising this happened, because you really would have thought by now that they would have paid more attention to cultural sensitivity. And, you know, also the issue of the soldiers urinating on the bodies of dead Taliban. This is really badly perceived by local Afghans, including many who initially supported the Americans. And the same with Guantanamo. You know, there's one issue after another which gives a negative sense of what the Americans are up to in Afghanistan. And I think is one reason why, and we have to be frank, that the war is being lost. It's not so much a losing a war, it's a war that could never be won.
And that's just it. I mean, as you say in the book, you only have to look back and see time and again how history has proven that military intervention in Afghanistan does not result in peace.
Absolutely. You know, the Soviets invaded in December 1979. They were there for almost a decade. Over 15,000 of their troops died. Over 1.5 million Afghans died as well. 22,000 villages destroyed. Much of the countryside, you know, shattered. And the Mujahideen, the resistance, were not winning. They just basically kept the pressure up on the Soviets. And the Americans, of course, at the time, they supported a lot of the fundamentalists who are ironically now fighting us, the Western forces, in Afghanistan today. These were the people we trained up. The Haqqani Network, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, these were all previous favorites of the Americans. And lo and behold, you know, they're now fighting us. And, you know, so you would think they would pay attention to history, but it just hasn't happened.
Why does the West fail to understand that incredibly complex tribal nature of Afghan society? Why is it so difficult?
Well, you know, a lot of the aid agencies, such as CARE, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, and the UN, they've been in there many, many years. There are some extremely good people on the ground. They know how to work with Afghans. In fact, some of the groups, such as the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, has been working for a long time with people they know are Taliban, but they ignore that. What they do is they focus on the communities, they focus on the individuals, and this is how you've got to work with them. You've got to give a sense of respect. There is no respect, and by announcing that, you know, you're achieving these gains on the ground, you're killing so and so many soldiers. I mean, it's déjà vu with Vietnam. You know, the daily quotas, and this is achieving nothing. Although, you know, I've talked to some officers who said, well, you know, we're now with the drones, we're killing all these commanders. But what in fact they're doing, they are killing the mid-level insurgent commanders who are the very people they should be talking to. The new ones coming up now are 19, 20, 21 years old. They've been educated in Pakistan. They don't understand Afghanistan. In fact, many of the older Afghans say these young people, they're not Afghans anymore. So we're actually creating, probably without wanting it, we're creating a new hardline element. Having said that, though, I think the overwhelming majority of Afghans, including Taliban, are actually very, very tired of this war and they want a way out. But it's not going to happen militarily.
And one thing you say in your book is the fact that, the Afghanis themselves are very hospitable people, but they say that we welcome foreigners, but when we want you to leave, we want you to leave. And that, it doesn't matter if you're an Arab or an American. It's very much part of the Afghan culture, isn't it?
Very much so. They're incredible hosts. I mean, I find them an extraordinary people. They're also very frustrating people. But I adore Afghanistan. And I've been, working in and out of the country for more than 30 years, as have been quite a few other journalists and aid workers. And you just develop this passion for Afghanistan, and it is an adventure. And I think what we're seeing today, very sadly, is that a lot of the people now involved with Afghanistan, the military, the aid organizations, they have no sense of personal perspective. And I'm talking about, people working 10 years ago. They come in, they act as if the war began in 2001 after the events of 9/11, which it did not happen. It's a more than 30-year-old war, or a series of wars. And you have got to understand this. And you've also got to understand that, whether you think you're doing a good thing by occupying the country, by bringing security supposedly in many areas, which is also not happening, when you are no longer perceived as a guest, then it really is time to go.
And it seems to be that message hasn't really sunk in as such. Coming back to NATO, there's been much criticism about the lack of long-term vision on the part of NATO as to what happens after 2014 when the last soldier is supposed to leave. Is it too late to draft a strategy?
I don't think it's too late, but there's going to have to be a lot of catching up to do. More than $58 billion has been spent in Afghanistan since 2001 on recovery. Hundreds of billions have gone into the military machine, enriched a lot of people, privileged Afghans, enriched a lot of American companies and other outsiders. So you have this aspect. But what Afghans want to see, they want to see a change in their way of life. And for most Afghans, particularly those living in rural areas, almost 80% of the Afghan population lives in the countryside. They have just not seen this change. And to my mind, I think, and this is a wonderful thing about being able to speak as a writer as opposed to a journalist, is that you can, by showing changes which are positive in the countryside, jobs, education, better health, this way you would be able to bring about reconciliation in the long term. You might not get the really hardline elements, the Taliban or the insurgents, but they're a very, very small group, and mainly in Pakistan. But I think most Afghans, if they do see positive things happening, they will be willing to sit down. And there are institutions which are proven, traditional institutions, which enable people to talk. And Afghans are always, always, always willing to talk. I mean, there's a wonderful saying, you can always rent an Afghan, you can't buy him. I mean, they will change sides if it's to the benefit of their own communities. And it's not an individual changing of sides, it really is what's in it for my people.
So it's not so much a short-term fix, but the need for very much a long-term strategy.
We're looking at least 20 to 30 years, and will Western democracies be willing to tolerate that? I think in the long run, Afghanistan is absolutely crucial to peace and security in the region. It's a very viable country in the long run with various mineral resources, agriculture. It could actually provide a lot of agriculture for Dubai, the Gulf countries, India, and oil-wise as well, pipelines. So in fact, I think Pakistan, India, Central Asia, the Gulf, they all need Afghanistan. So it is really a worthwhile investment.
So is it possible, do you think, Edward, for the Afghans to rebuild a peaceful nation, given that it's a very complex society? There's a lot of tribal clan rivalry as such. I mean, there's a lot of distrust. That's the bottom line that comes through your book.
Absolutely, there's a lot of distrust, but at the same time, during the Soviet war was actually the one time where Afghans came together as a nation. They had this wonderful expression of, countrymen, which used to mean someone from your village, but during the war, during the height of the Soviet war, it meant someone who was fighting with you. So in a sense, you've got to regain the same need for rebuilding the country together. It's going to be very, very hard. But I think, given the fatigue, and there is incredible fatigue, and really, most ordinary people, they want education for their kids. Even the traditionalists, even the hardliners, they do want to have their girls go to school. I mean, there are many areas in eastern Afghanistan which originally rose up against the communists because they were being forced to send their girls to schools. They all have girls' schools.
Edouard Girardet, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Great pleasure.
And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.